the outlook for holiday retail in 2020. My guest is Eric Fisch, National Sector Head for Retail and Apparel with HSBC Bank USA. Eric, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So what are some of the highlights of your outlook for this coming peak holiday season?
Sure. It's certainly a confusing time for retailers across the spectrum of brands, across the spectrum of categories. And so what we expect generally is a continued trend towards casualization. So the brands that focus on athleisure, that focus on comfort are going to do well. Outdoor activities are going to do well. Mm-hmm. And then across the general spectrum of the rest of the retail market, we're expecting better than the second quarter. So better than the first half of the year, but still more muted consumer spending. People want to spend money, they want to shop, they want to give gifts. And so I think we're expecting it to be okay, but not great.
Well, help me to understand why some of those subcategories are going to outpace retail in general. You mentioned athleisure. I think you've also talked about footwear, intimates, loungewear, and things like that. Why are those sectors poised to do better?
Yeah, I think everyone in the country went into this state of lockdown early in the year and shifted towards what provided the most comfort for them. And generally, people were at home or not in a formal workspace, and so everyone sort of moved to a more casualized setting. And so, whatever that meant for you, if you used to wear a suit, then perhaps you wore jeans. If you used to wear jeans, maybe you now wear athleisure. At the same time, I think given that it's more difficult to go to indoor spaces, a lot of people are spending more time outdoors. There's more of a shift and a trend towards exercise in different settings. And so that's led to that trend of athleisure.
How cutthroat or how promotional do you expect retailers to get as they're jockeying for advantage and trying to get sales coming their way this season?
The simple answer is very promotional. Across the board, it's difficult to attract people's attention and to get them to make that purchase. And so the discounts really started very early on. With the shift of Amazon's Prime Day to much later in the year, that essentially launched the holiday shopping season. Other companies tried to compete with that Prime Day by launching their own discounts. And we expect it to hold through all the way through the holiday season. Mm-hmm. It will impact margins. It will impact company's ability to generate a profit that they're looking to make. But what it will do is it'll allow them to hit the top line, the sales numbers that they're looking for, and it will allow them to move the inventory that they desperately need to move in order to then bring in goods for the spring.
Of course, the price is, move the inventory, but at what cost? They don't want to be losing money on the inventory and starting sales before the season's even over. But what's happening to Black Friday this year? Do you think that the importance of Black Friday and the whole mania surrounding it is changing?
So I think it's important. I think it's important for the market. It's important for the shopper to feel a signal that it's time to start spending for the holidays. At the same time, I do think it's going to be more stretched out. So I would expect that leading up to Thanksgiving, there'll be a lot more promotional sales than we've seen in the past because people have the ability to do it over a more extended period of time. So I think we're going to have to look at Black Friday more as Black Week or something of a longer tenor just to get the appropriate data to compare it to other years.
We're hearing that the so-called holiday shopping season, which traditionally started with Black Friday and then backed up to maybe into early November, is now inclusive of all of October too, that we should be looking at this in terms of a 3-month peak season. I'm wondering how you feel about that. Do you think that people are starting to shop early?
Yeah, and I tie it back to that concept of the Prime Day and the fact that it was so late in the year that holiday was already kind of on people's mind as they went into those sales. And so when you couple that with all the other brands that have had to be promotional as a result, I do think it's an extended fourth quarter. I think for this year, at least, that's the way we're going to have to look at it. It's the entire fourth quarter. How did that compare to prior years?
To what extent do you believe that it's actually driven by the pandemic versus possibly we'll see this trend in future years when the pandemic has subsided?
So I think the pandemic has accelerated changes that were already in process. So to the extent that we were all shifting to more e-commerce and away from brick and mortar, to the extent that we were casualizing our wardrobe, all these things were in process and trending. But the pandemic, according to some studies, has accelerated as much as 5 years. So those 5 years have certainly impacted all of us, and it will. I don't think it will revert, but I don't think it was anything that the pandemic created that didn't already exist in some way prior.
We talked about the importance of moving inventory. What are the inventory positions of wholesalers and retailers right now? I imagine it's pretty stocked up, that a lot of warehouses are full, back rooms are full, shelves are full. Is that a concern? Just what is the inventory position as we speak?
Yeah, I don't think it's quite as negative as that necessarily. I think everyone's stocked for the holidays and has prepared and brought in goods, but everyone reacted pretty quickly, both on the retail and wholesale sides, to the shutdowns back in the spring. And they canceled orders. They closed out inventory that they thought wouldn't last. We had a number of clients that had spring inventory from 2020 that they expected to hold for an indeterminate period of time. And actually, they've been able to cycle it into the system over the course of the year. So I think everyone has a more manageable level of inventory. They still need the consumer to shop, but the expectation was that this was going to be a down year, and so they bought accordingly. Going into 2021, I think it's more complex and more murky what they do in terms of purchasing. What does that year look like? Does it look like 2020, or does it look like 2019? And what do you buy for to prepare?
What are we talking about here, Eric? And I mean, just at base, are we talking about traditional brick and mortar shopping and buying, or are we talking about e-commerce primarily? Just what is this conversation really about this year?
Yeah, it's certainly a combination of both. The digital native e-commerce only retailers were clearly best positioned for a situation where no one could go into stores. That's a small percentage of the overall retail business. Most companies have some sort of physical presence, and so they've had to adjust and certainly drove a lot of additional revenue through their e-commerce. But now looking forward, they have to decide what is the right number of retail stores, and how do you reorient your internal systems more towards that e-commerce platform. So
Yeah.
does that mean you ship from store? Does it mean you do a buy online, pick up in store, or a combination of all these things to optimize the efficiency of whatever brick and mortar platform you have to work in conjunction with the e-commerce? And then something we haven't touched on is the wholesale component for a lot of brands, which was challenged, and there were canceled orders and uncertainty, but remains an important third leg of that stool for most brands.
Yeah. We have seen a steady increase in e-commerce as a share of total retail sales, but this year, because of the pandemic, it really was quite an uptick. I'm wondering, might this year represent a real turning point in the fortunes of e-commerce? Might this be indication of years to come, e-commerce really, if not takes over completely, becomes a much bigger component of total retail sales?
Yeah, I think yes. It certainly has accelerated it. I mentioned that statistic I had heard of 5-year acceleration. So I think that will continue. I don't think brick and mortar retail ever goes away. Too many people enjoy the experience of going to a store, shopping, the social aspect of it, the ability to try on in a fitting room and not have to ship back and forth. So I don't think it goes away, certainly. I think we're over retailed. The United States has too much retail space. And so that's a process that has to work itself out. But the benefit of that, the silver lining, I'll say, of that for a lot of e-commerce brands is the ability, as potentially rents come down, to explore the physical store concept in what might be an advantageous expense structure. So is it a percentage rent? Is it a pop-up that's very short-lived? To understand what that feels like and allow the consumer to experience the brand that way.
If we can extend our telescopic lens just a little bit more, do you have a view of early 21, the retail landscape, and say the first quarter vis-a-vis the first quarter of any typical year? Any idea of how it's going to shape up?
Yeah, most of my wholesalers are receiving orders that look a lot like 2019. So meaning more normalized. So I think that's the expectation of the shopper. I'm optimistic that 2021 feels a lot more normal to all of us, feels like an up year to 2020. And so my advice to my clients is anticipate a more normalized year, but maintain liquidity and don't get over aggressive with those inventory purchases to create a situation where you have a problem if there's an additional lockdown or some other impact.
Certainly good news for consumers. It looks like there's going to be a lot of bargains this season. I don't know how good the news is for retailers in terms of making a margin on it. But Eric Fisch of HSBC Bank USA, thank you so much for giving us a snapshot of what we can expect in the coming weeks and maybe even a little bit beyond in retail. Thanks very much for being with me today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.